Okay. Okay. YouTube is up and working now. Okay, that's exciting. Exciting news. So I've got 11 of us over here on Instagram. Okay, if you're watching on YouTube, make sure to send a message so I know who you are, and then we can get started. So for those of you who are already here, today I know it's all of your first classes easing into this distance learning shift. So I'm going to ask a couple questions of all of you so that I can get a better idea of how you're feeling in order to proceed most effectively for us as a group of people. So it certainly won't be a full lecture for our full class period. I said in the Blackboard announcement that I'd be asking you all some questions, and you can either type these up directly in an email to me. If it's easier for you to write them by hand and then send a picture of that to me by email, you're free to do that as well. I think after experimenting with these live stream options, but also looking into various platforms like WebEx, Zoom, and Google Classrooms and Blackboard, all of those different things, I'm going to make a call of a way to allow us to have the discussion sections like we've been used to in our class, but I'm trying to devise the best way to do that. So get your paper and pen ready if you're going to write by hand, or get ready to type it up in an email to me. I see Ahmad over here on YouTube. Hi. I'm just trying to get us set up, so if anyone needs to be grabbing anything, you can. Okay. So Anuna asked a question. She asked, did anything change for the historiography since we changed the due date? And no, the assignment is still exactly the same. I just thought since we are all sort of scrambling to make this shift, just to push the due date back a bit later to give us some more flexibility. So the assignment is still exactly as it stands in the assignment sheet, and that'll just give us a little bit extra time if you're not able to access some of your sources through the library, or if you run into any problems like that. I just wanted to allow us a little bit of wiggle room if that ends up being the case. So historiography assignment is still the same, but just due later. Yeah, no problem. Okay, good morning. Sorry, YouTube people, I was having trouble loading us up for today, but I'm glad to see you all hopping on as well. Okay, so with those of you that are here, I'm just going to pose the first question to you all that I'm really interested in having some answers to. And it's just simply, how have your lives been affected by this shift? Anything you feel comfortable sharing with me, or feel like you need me to know so that we are on the same page about how to proceed with this class based on this shift. I've always acted in the interest of transparency with you all, as you know, and I'm under no false notion that this is business as usual and we're not going to be able to maintain our class exactly the way that we have in the classroom. So the first question that I would like to receive from you all that you can write by hand. Not everybody in the group is going to be reading this. It'll just be me reading this. Either type it in an email to me or write it by hand. I just want to know, what do I need to know about how your lives have changed since this switch has occurred? So I'm going to give you a couple minutes to write out your thoughts on that. So I'll go quiet for a couple minutes and let you have some time to write. When you're done writing, send me a little emoji or done or something along those lines so I know. Some of you are wrapping up, but I'll just give a couple more minutes for those still writing. Thank you, guys. Okay. Lots of us are wrapping up. So I'm going to ask the next to include in this email or write up for me, and that is my current thought process right now is that the YouTube and Instagram option is great for certain reasons. It's great because it's super easy to use. It was something that I knew most of you would probably already have access to. It was also something that I knew likely wouldn't crash or crumble under the pressure of all of these different people hopping online and using these online formats. The other positive thing is I love how YouTube is recording me now, and it will automatically be uploaded and easily findable for people who can't watch it at a certain point. It's also nice because we can do it at our normal class time. But I'm also very aware that it's not exactly fun to be on camera from 9:30 in the morning till 1 in the afternoon. So I kind of wanted to give you guys the option of easing into the day without, having to be on camera right away. I don't know if that's something you all are concerned about, but that's something I had been thinking about. I've practiced with WebEx and Zoom and all those other formats as well. I think there are many pros to those platforms. I think obviously being able to see your faces and talk to each other and communicate that way would be a plus. So my idea right now, and in keeping with the please be flexible with me as I iron all this stuff out, is possibly me recording what are called micro at any time. They won't be that long. So many people I'm hearing would prefer not having to be on the computer all at the same time, though a lot of you expressed to me last time that you do want to maintain our normal 9:30 meetings. So the idea would be to do micro lectures via YouTube, but then conduct our classes via Zoom and record those class sessions and upload them maybe on Blackboard for the people who are not able to be here at 9:30 each day. I know this is many of your first classes, but what I would like to hear from you is, one, if you've done a practice session with Zoom. Two, if you liked it. Three, if it's going to be annoying to be on Zoom for hours and hours and hours at a time. Or if you feel particularly compelled to keep the live streaming option. So this is another thing that you can send to me in an email or write up on the same piece of paper. But my current proposal to you all, now that I have, okay, Michael's saying that Zoom crashes. That's what I was worried about too. That was one of the reasons that I thought this way would be a little bit more foolproof in that regard. So spend a little bit of time. Don't write your answers necessarily in the comments here, but write them to me up in the same email that you just wrote. How your experiences have been going with Zoom, or any other online formats. So I'll give you a couple minutes. Once again, send a little sign that you're done writing. Okay, as people are wrapping up answers to that question, my follow-up question to you all, and this is completely genuine on my end, and I want completely genuine answers from you. The question is, what have been your favorite parts of this class that you would like to try to maintain as best we can in these online formats? For example, is it, have you been enjoying the readings? Is it most important to have discussions with each other? I'm also considering letting go of certain components potentially in the interest of making your lives easier. So the question is, what should I absolutely keep that you wouldn't want me to cut? Um, and if there's something that you think would make life easier, I'm not guaranteeing that I would cut it, but give me some insight about what your workload looks like now and how we can best adapt our class to that new workload. So, same thing, send me a done when you're done. Okay. Thank you guys so much. I'm really, really looking forward to seeing your answers. The last question, that I'm really interested in hearing from you all as well is, um, one, are you willing to be flexible with me as I make a change in plans yet again? Hopefully, the answer is yes. The second thing is, if the issue at hand is that these online platforms keep crashing, which could certainly happen, I think we could just shift, maybe trying Zoom and seeing how it works. If that doesn't work, we can use this route that we're doing right now as a backup. So, one, is it going to get annoying if I make a switch? And two, um, are we willing to give a Zoom discussion a try as a class on Tuesday? And if it doesn't work, I'll start a live stream just like this and do it this way. So that'll be the last question to answer in your email. And if there's anything else that you need me to know or anything else that you need to get in contact with me about, you can include that in the write up or the email, just so all of the information is consolidated. Okay, everyone. Okay, this is great. So I have the majority of the class with us right now, only missing a few people. So once I get the answers to those questions from you all after today's class, I'll be able to consolidate, figure out what the best game plan is. I know that there's already been a lot of changes, and after this test with you all, I will try to um, I will make an executive decision about how we'll move forward. The other thing that you all could do that would be super helpful to me is let me know, send me an email with how the rest of your classes go today. So if you're doing Zoom in your other classes, if it crashes, if you could email me that and tell me, I would love to have that information. This would make you all hopefully laugh, but the Brooklyn College History Department just had a virtual meeting via Zoom last night, and we were all, sitting there and talking about all the different approaches that we're doing. So at the very least, just know that the history department is working tirelessly to make this transition as easy as possible. And if you do have any questions, all of us are happy to reach out to you. Yeah. So James said he saw it on Professor Napoli's Instagram, and I have to tell you all, Professor Napoli has taken an unbelievable leadership position in trying to help us out with this shift, this unprecedented shift. So the history department has been hard at work trying to get this shift going, but the main takeaway is that we're all going to have to be patient and forgiving and flexible with one another at this time. But just so you all know, to reiterate, you guys have been my favorite class of all time. I'd love to see your faces. That's another reason I'd like to make the switch. I'd love to hear your voices like we used to. I'm so bummed that we are doing it this way now. It's obviously the safest option, but I just wanted to reiterate and express to you all how great it has been to have you as a group. And we will find a way to move forward, even though it's okay to acknowledge that it's a bummer that it's this way. Okay, so shifting gears a little bit. If you guys feel like you got everything out that you needed to, today we're talking about Holocaust consciousness in the United States. I saw that most of you were able to still upload your questions onto Blackboard without any troubles. You guys asked wonderful questions. I'm taking today as giving you guys a general timeline of how Holocaust consciousness developed in the United States, some key turning points in the development of that sense of consciousness. But the thing I want to ask you is, have you seen, within the last year, there have been a number of articles coming out, and the headlines say something to the extent of, less than half of American adults know how many Jews were killed in the Holocaust. All of these articles are coming out, and there was a study done by the Claims Conference that interviewed around 1,350 adults and asked them all these various questions about the Holocaust, like factual questions. Do they know the facts? And the numbers are pretty bleak. People don't know the answers to these questions. But can you guess? Can you guess the percentage of these 1,350 adults? What percentage of them said we should learn about the Holocaust? So type in your guess. What percentage said we should still learn about it? This is something really important that we need to know about. Let's see who gets the closest. Type your guess into the comments. And don't look it up. Okay, Michael's guess is 10%. 45% from Cynthia, 40%, 40%, 10%. Jonathan says 5%. 50, 70, 25, 20. I feel like an auctioneer over here. Okay. Good guesses, everyone. So the stats are kind of staggering. People don't know where Auschwitz was. They don't know how many Jews were killed during the Holocaust. They don't know. One really key thing that they do not know is that they don't know, and you guys might not know, that Hitler became Chancellor of Germany through a democratic process. So a staggering number of these American adults assumed that Hitler forcefully overthrew the German government, and that's simply not the case. So that's an interesting lack of knowledge in that regard. However, all is a really interesting thing for what we've been talking about in our class. So the public, or these 1,350 adults who were interviewed, don't know the facts about the Holocaust themselves, but they do think it's incredibly important to be educating students in schools about it, for example, and that it should be an important thing for people to know about in their, day-to-day existence as citizens. So I wanted to use that as an entry point for us today because I'm going to give us a bit of a timeline. You all read Ed Linenthal's introduction to a book called Preserving Memory. And one thing that I want us to keep in mind is that we've been talking about all these different forms of memory, national memory. Oh, the percentage, they lost me on YouTube. The percentage is 93%. 93% of the adults said that we should all be educated about the Holocaust. So looking at the discrepancy between the numbers of how many think we should be educated, but we're actually not that educated based on this study. So I had you read Ed Linenthal's Preserving Memory, and I had you read Elie Wiesel's, yeah, Chris won. I'll have to come up with some sort of prize for you, virtual prize. So question for you all now, the next thing I want to see in the comments is how many of you knew who Elie Wiesel was before I assigned this primary source reading? And if you do know who he is, who is he? Have you interacted with his work before? So go ahead and type that into the comments. Okay. This is good to know. Okay, so Raymond's Red Knight. A lot of us didn't know who he was. Okay, this is good for me to know. So Elie Wiesel was a Holocaust survivor. He became somewhat of like the Holocaust survivor in the public eye. He was a survivor of Auschwitz, and he wrote a memoir/novel about his time there. And many students have read this in school, but schools have decided to assign different readings. Night came out originally in French and was translated into English in the 60s, and its widespread publication kind of propelled Elie Wiesel to a position of authority on speaking about the Holocaust. So he was born in Romania. I'm looking for, Night originally published 1956. So this became somewhat of a standard texts that people read in order to learn, or maybe this was their first impression of the Holocaust. A lot of the book has to do with Wiesel's experience in Auschwitz alongside his father. And Wiesel became instrumental in proposing the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C. So the reason I had you all read that primary source is so you can get a sense of how Elie Wiesel and other Holocaust survivors who were a part of the President's Commission on the Holocaust articulated the reasons for the need for a Holocaust museum in the United States. And as early as the late 1970s, how this group of people advocated on behalf of a museum on the National Mall that would alert the American public to this history. So today, I'll give you a few key dates in the development of Holocaust consciousness in the United States. I have 5 key ones here, but there's many more that could have been included, but just to give you a little insight into how this is developed. We have to start all the way back in 1945. 1945 as the end of World War II. And one of the key moments in the origins of American Holocaust consciousness come from American troops experiencing and participating in the liberation of concentration camps, of labor camps, and seeing the utter destruction and devastation within those camps. So one of my initial pieces of research had to do with 9 US Army nurses who were around many of your ages, entering into a satellite camp of Mauthausen concentration camp. And all of the people they saw, either living or dead, they described as all skin and bones or human skeletons. And you have to imagine that these young women, many of them, I listened to 9 of their interviews, many of them returning home to, some of them Brooklyn, with these images pressed into their minds. And so this was one of the ways that knowledge of the Holocaust and the realities of the atrocities became more pervasive in the American public's understanding based on all of these Army veterans returning home. So this becomes the image of the American liberation of these camps. And you have to know that British forces and Soviet forces also liberated various camps. But in the case of American Holocaust consciousness, these troops' experiences of liberating the camps became impressed upon the American public in certain ways. The other component of this 1945 moment in the American mind was the production of film newsreel clips. So sending these newsreels back to the United States and being projected in cinemas. So everyday people seeing images of these Nazi camps, being liberated by American troops and being actually filmed and photographed by American troops as well. And that same group of 9 nurses, 9 US Army nurses that I mentioned before, many of them would go to the movies upon their return to the United States, and they would hear people in the theaters dismissing the images that they were seeing as propaganda, as fake. So this sense of not wanting to or outright denying what happened in Europe began nearly immediately in the late 1940s. So has anyone seen, like in your previous history classes of Okay, so for the YouTube people that got cut out on, I'm asking, have any of you seen images of the liberation of concentration camps in your previous classes or elsewhere? Okay, so I'm seeing a lot of yes from most of you. Nobody has not seen these images. So it is horrifying, absolutely. They're extremely difficult to look at, and the reason I'm asking you this is just because if you have an idea of what that looked like, this is what thousands of young American troops were returning home with in their minds. I have also studied something where, like, gatherings of American veterans of World War II gathered with each other, um, and they held on to photos of the camps for decades after the fact. So this tells us a lot about individual senses of memory of witnessing that moment that had such ginormous global significance. So in personally hanging on to photographs of these liberation experiences, we have to keep in mind the ways that these individual memories of liberation and what would later be known as the Holocaust was impressed upon the minds of so many American people. So I have a question for you to type up in the comments. Do you remember from the Linenthal reading? Did Linenthal say that American Jews talked a lot about the Holocaust between 1940 and the 1960s? And if you can't find it, take some time to look back at the reading if possible. So, according to Linenthal, did American Jews talk about the Holocaust between 45 and the 1960s? So, for those of you saying he said they didn't, can you find a page number? You're right, but can you find a page number where he says that? Okay, so Jonathan gives us page 5. So you're right. On page 5, James also says 13 into 14. On page 5, there's a quote that says, they called it a public secret, but that was during the Holocaust and World War II. Linenthal writes, this was followed in the spring of 1945 by the equally passionate public desire to ignore the unforgettable images that had greeted the troops when they encountered the camps. So, a big impetus of this moment is attempting to rid themselves of these images that they saw as liberators. But the other component that we have to keep in mind is there's a population of American Jews who were in the United States during World War II and the Holocaust and might have had family in Europe that they learned about over the course of the war. And there's also, in the post-war period, numbers of Holocaust survivors who immigrated to the United States who are receiving mixed messages about how to reconcile their experiences during the Holocaust into becoming Americans. So Jonathan said, Linenthal says they were trying to assimilate and were more concerned about being Americans and fitting into an American identity. And at this point in time, though, when we hear the term Holocaust survivor today, I would say that we're we have an image of pride and great respect. At this point in time, there was a great amount of shame associated with being a Holocaust survivor. So when Linenthal is talking to you about uh, trying to assimilate and maybe forget these stories, I think that tells us a lot about how memory in a post-war world took on different forms of intentional forgetting or trying to move on. But we get a great shift from someone like Elie Wiesel later on, who is saying the famous quote, "For the dead and the living, we must bear witness. We must memorialize the Holocaust. We must talk about the Holocaust." So when we're entering into this post-war moment and a couple decades that follow, there's essentially forms of stigma on various levels about remembering the Holocaust in a public way. So, however, one really important scholar published a book in 2009 that I want you all to know if you're interested in looking into it. Her name is Hasia Diner, spelled Hasia, last name Diner, Diner. And the book is called We Remember with Reverence and Love, American Jews and the Myth of Silence After the Holocaust, 1945 to 1962. So I can send you a link to that book if you're interested, but Diner's book totally refutes this myth of silence. So considering the myth of silence and reconciling with this myth of silence based on what Linenthal says in his book, which was published much earlier, Hasia Diner diligently documents how American Jews had been commemorating the Holocaust in that period between 1945 and 1962. In their synagogues, in schools, they were trying to commemorate with physical monuments, but many of the proposals were denied. So that's a really interesting and quite lengthy book about how this myth of silence after the Holocaust is not as factual as Linenthal claims in his book. So we see here Hasia Diner contending with the former previous historiography, saying that that was actually not true. But one thing that I wanted to call to your attention today as part of one of the key moments in the development of Holocaust consciousness in the United States is the publication of Raoul Hilberg's The Destruction of the European Jews. It was published in 1961, and on page 5 of Linenthal's introduction, we see the name Raoul Hilberg, and I want to get into that in a second. But Carly asked a question on YouTube. She asks, how aware was the outside world in terms of Nazi treatment of the Jewish population before the war and when the mass killings began? That's a wonderful question, Carly. There were various degrees of outside knowledge. There's an entire exhibit at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum today called Americans in the Holocaust, in which they show all the various newspaper articles about what was happening in Europe, in the United States, like how they were talking about it in the United States. The USHMM, I'll refer to it from here on out, USHMM did a project where they asked citizen historians, which are everyday people, usually older people who have a little more free time, to go to their local city archives and look up key dates in the development of the Holocaust in World War II in their local papers to see what everyday Americans knew about the Holocaust as it unfolded. So, for example, if you lived in Denver, Colorado, and you wanted to see what the newspapers at that time were writing about Hitler being appointed Chancellor of Germany, these citizen historians would go back to their local archives, dig up all the newspapers, and see if and how they talked about these events as they developed. The other piece of this puzzle, like I brought up, is the newsreels. So people were seeing the development of the war, and learning about killings of like mass killings of Jews by newsreels, by radio, um, and in other forms of publications in addition to newspapers. The other piece of this question is what did politicians and policymakers uh, know about the Holocaust as it unfolded? And there's a wealth of information on that question. So I think it's best for today that I send you a link to the um, online exhibit that you can explore, so you have a better sense of what the knowledge of the Holocaust was during the war, if that's something that you're interested in looking further into. Okay. Any more questions right now before I jump into Raoul Hilberg? Can I get a little thumbs up or still here? If you're still here, can you guys hear me? Am I shouting into the void? Let me know. Okay. Thank you. Sounds good. Okay, any questions for now? Any questions about the liberation stuff? Are we good to move? Okay, cool. Good to see you guys still. All right. So I thought this story of Raoul Hilberg would be of interest to you all. Same question that I asked about Elie Wiesel. Have you guys come across the name Raoul Hilberg ever before in one of your previous classes? So you can just say yes or no. Do we know who he is at all? Okay. All knows. All knows. Okay, this is great because this story will be riveting to you guys, I think. So, Raoul Hilberg is one of the most well-known names in Holocaust history and Holocaust studies. In 1961, he published a massive work called The Destruction of the European Jews. It was 1,273 pages long. And Raoul Hilberg's background is incredibly interesting to think about questions of the archive and first day of class. Hilberg's story is comparably interesting, in my opinion, for our purposes. So Hilberg was born to a Jewish family in Vienna, Austria in 1926. So his family was greatly affected by Hitler's rise to power and the Nazi Party's ascension. So his family was forcibly evicted by Nazi forces. And on April 1st, 1939, his family decided to flee from Austria, which was a few months after the 1938 German annexation of Austria, so the Anschluss, in which Austria became part of the Third Reich. So his family flees from Austria through France. They spent about 4 months in Cuba before reaching the United States on September 1st, 1939. If we're all still here, why is that so crazy that he arrived on September 1st, 1939? What else is happening on that date? Who's going to give me the answer first? What's happening September 1st, 1939? on, history majors. Yes. Okay. It's the exact date that Germany invaded Poland and World War II broke out in Europe. So he arrives. I know, gotta have speedy fingers when we're answering this way. Um, he arrives in the United States on the exact day that the invasion of Poland occurred. So he arrives, and his family settles. Guess where? In Brooklyn, New York. At that point, he was college aged, and you'll never guess where he goes to school. Brooklyn College. So Raoul Hilberg is this young, recently immigrated refugee. I guess you could use the word refugee here accurately, but he went to Brooklyn College. And he decided he wanted to study chemistry, but he decided that that was not. Oh, Instagram's telling me that there's a minute left. I guess there's a limit here. So maybe if I'm going to lose you guys, you can switch over to the YouTube link. I posted it on, I had no idea there was a limit. I posted it on Blackboard if you can switch over to YouTube. Okay, James is telling me I can start another one. So when this cuts us out, I just hang tight and I'll start another one. We're getting to the meat of our story here. But with my last 30 seconds before Instagram cuts out, this person who had fled Austria. Okay, I'll go live again. This will be our little cliffhanger. Hilberg was drafted into the U.S. Army and is part of the 45th Infantry and has to return to Europe as a U.S. Army, part of the U.S. Army. So with that, I'm out of my time on Instagram. I'll start a new one. Okay. YouTubers, hold tight with me. Here's where our technical difficulties begin. Okay, little break. Okay, I'm back. I'm going to let them all join us. Okay, hi. Thanks for coming back. You guys are the best. Thanks for your patience. 15 more minutes and then we'll wrap up for today. Hi, everyone. Welcome back. Okay. That's good to know. I'll know for next time now that the limitation is an hour. Okay. Hi, everyone. So we're with Raoul Hilberg. He's drafted into the U.S. Army. And as a native German speaker and knowing other languages as well, Hilberg becomes attached to something called the War Documentation Department. So a branch of the Army, the War Documentation Department, sought to collect documentation of German crimes during the war. And so Hilberg, as someone, imagine yourself like coming out of Brooklyn College, being drafted into the Army, and going through all of these archives in order to understand like German perpetration of the war. And so he ends up examining archives all throughout Europe. So he's traveling with this unit and reading all these different archival documents. And he decides that he's going to write about this history once he's out of his U.S. Army service. So at the end of the war, upon his return to the United States, he goes back to Brooklyn College. He finishes his bachelor's in political science in 1948. He ends up going into a PhD program at Columbia University and he gets his PhD in 1955 and starts teaching at the University of Vermont, which a lot of you guys saw in the Linenthal reading. But during this time, he is also trying to get his monumental work, The Destruction of the European Jews, published. And many people are not interested in publishing at that point in time this particular book. His PhD advisor was like, no one is going to publish that as long as it is. So he ended up only publishing, I think, about a quarter of it at first, which went on to receive a lot of different kinds of prizes at that point in time. But one of the key things that I want you all to know, one of the pieces of rationale for not wanting to publish this book in the 1950s was because of the Cold War alliance between the US and West Germany. So Hilberg based his entire book on documents from the German perspective and looked at how the Holocaust was perpetrated through German perpetrator perspectives. He looked at all of the different structural mechanisms that were required to perpetrate the Holocaust, including political structures, legal, administrative, and organizational. And many of these publishing houses thought that if the American public learns too much about the crimes of the Germans, they would not be as supportive of a United States-West German alliance in the context of the Cold War. So this is one among many examples of public suppression of knowledge of the Holocaust in the interest of fostering this new Cold War alliance with West Germany. So this book eventually becomes published in 1961, and it becomes one of the benchmark ways of knowing how Nazi Germany perpetrated the destruction of the European Jews. This becomes, moving forward, people are grateful for the knowledge that comes from this book, and it's still cited today, but it did not include the perspective of victims or survivors of the Holocaust. And so a variety of projects, including USHMM, like we talked about before, begin to consider how victim and survivor perspectives, particularly Jewish perspectives in this case, which we will talk about more when I see you all back again on Tuesday, different victim groups during the Holocaust and how discussions about the memory of their persecution developed as well. But the next date for what we're talking about today, meanwhile, the Eichmann trial is happening around the same time of Hilberg's publication of The Destruction of the European Jews. If we don't know about the Eichmann trial, we don't have a lot of time to go into it now, but a major official being prosecuted and people watching it on their TVs around the world, the Eichmann trial becomes an important moment in the development of this widespread public consciousness as well. But we're zooming ahead to 1978, just to contextualize the primary source that you all read from Elie Wiesel. In 1978, on November 1st, President Jimmy Carter established the President's Commission on the Holocaust. So Jimmy Carter appoints 24 members to this commission. These members were members of the American Jewish community. They were Holocaust survivors. Many of them were survivors and professors at the same time. Some of them are non-Jewish members of this council. One was Bayard Rustin, who was a prominent Black civil rights activist. And so this group of people of the President's Commission on the Holocaust and a corresponding advisory board embark on something called a fact-finding mission throughout Eastern Europe. And so you have to imagine some of these people are survivors of the Holocaust from Eastern Europe themselves. So around 30 years after the Holocaust in World War II, these people return to Eastern Europe upon the request of the United States president to collect facts about the Holocaust in communist ruled countries in the context of the Cold War. I mean, we could teach our entire myth and memory in modern world history, I think, on just that alone. So we have the US wanting to promote Holocaust consciousness in its own country, but the survivors themselves are returning to the sites of their personal trauma in the interest of developing a national understanding of what the Holocaust was. And I think that is pretty mind-blowing. One really interesting moment is one survivor on the commission named Miles Lehrman. He was a resistance fighter during the Holocaust, and I think he knew 7 or 8 languages, and so he became this primary person to interact with Soviet and other Eastern European diplomats, and they were trying to get into the archives of Eastern Europe in order to understand the facts of what happened to the Holocaust. And there's this one really interesting moment. He was interviewed in the 2000s about this experience of the fact-finding mission. And he recounts this moment in which he's speaking Russian with one of the diplomats. And the diplomat is being friendly and talking to him in English for as long as they can. And so Miles Lehrman is slowly pushing the boundaries of trying to learn what he can learn from this place. And he says, Miles Lehrman, the now American, formerly Polish, born in Poland survivor, says, we're not here for politics, referring to the Cold War. We're not here for politics, we're only here for history. And this diplomat that he was talking to in the oral history testimony, Lehrman remembers, he says, he was speaking better English than me up until this point, and at this point he snapped into this more accented, his accent comes out, and he says, Mr. Lehrman, everything is politics in the context of the Cold War. So in the development of Holocaust consciousness, we continuously see these Cold War tensions in the ways that people are commemorating the Holocaust around the world, but in the United States especially. So upon the President's Commission on the Holocaust board and all of the members return to the United States, Elie Wiesel, who is the chair, ends up writing and sending this report to President Carter on September 27th, 1979. And within this recommendation that you all read, Wiesel and the rest of the President's Commission on the Holocaust recommended the building of the museum. So this museum, some of the language that I find really interesting in Wiesel's report is he mentions that the United States must learn about the Holocaust for a variety of reasons, but one of the reasons in keeping this Cold War theme is that at some point in there, I can't find the page number right now, he writes that the United States public must know about the Holocaust so as to avoid a nuclear Holocaust in the late 1970s at that point when he wrote it. So that very much that nuclear anxiety is present, but there's also a variety of components about memorializing those that perished would never happen again, which we will talk about how that has never, up until today, rung true. So the groundbreaking of the museum, so when the museum was actually being physically constructed, occurred in 1985. The cornerstone of the museum was laid in 1988 under the Reagan administration. So one of the really interesting things about studying the institutional history of USHMM is how each US president approaches their relationship to USHMM differently every 4 or 8 years. So we see the cornerstone of the museum being laid with Ronald Reagan present, but then the museum is opened on April 22nd, 1993, under Bill Clinton's administration. And so the thing I will have to probably leave with you today is that day that the museum opened was an incredibly rainy day. Just to set the scene, we have Elie Wiesel present, delivering the opening remarks to an audience that included Bill Clinton and other world leaders, US Congress members, other survivors and their families, and they're on the National Mall. And Wiesel stated that in each phase of planning this museum, he had one sentence in mind, and that is, "For the dead and the living, we must bear witness." And so those words were then, from that point on, engraved in stone at the museum's entrance. And this sentiment really captured the museum's mission and its desired functions. And its functions were to honor and memorialize victims, to preserve and share Holocaust history and memory, and to educate American citizens. And Wiesel hoped that every person who visited the museum would subsequently become a witness in their own way. And so this interesting moment happens while Wiesel is concluding his speech. He poses the question to the audience, so what have we learned? What have we learned about the Holocaust? And he says, we have learned some lessons, minor lessons perhaps, and he shares this sense of responsibility to take actions when other people around the world were suffering. But Wiesel was not satisfied, saying that the world had not sufficiently learned their lessons yet. And at this moment, Wiesel is at the microphone in front of this huge crowd, and he turns around and confronts President Bill Clinton about the contemporary war in Bosnia that was unfolding at that moment. And Wiesel says to Clinton, quote, "Mr. President, I cannot not tell you something. I have been in the former Yugoslavia last fall. We must do something to stop the bloodshed in that country. Something, anything must be done. This is a lesson. There are many other lessons. You will come, you will learn, we shall learn together." So this interaction, maybe we can think about it in terms of multi-directional memory potentially, shows how unfolding wars and genocides of the 1990s propelled Holocaust consciousness in the United States in a wide variety of directions. And this included one example in 1995, the Holocaust Museum in DC established something called the Committee on Conscience, which served to work to halt acts of genocide or other related crimes against humanity in contemporary times. So when I see you all back on Tuesday, whether that's in the form of Instagram and YouTube, or on Zoom, or in different routes, we will talk about the ways that supposed Holocaust uniqueness influenced the ways that people involved in Holocaust consciousness talked about various victim groups during the Holocaust. Next class, we're talking particularly about women in the Holocaust. But we'll also talk about how, as other genocides unfolded around the world in 1990s, the ways people were talking about the Holocaust underwent great changes. So we're out of time for today. I'll end it there. Please send me those emails of the questions that I asked at the beginning of our session today as soon as possible. If you would like to add how you felt about this format, did you like it? Do you wish you could have talked? Please include that as well, so I know how to adapt as we move forward. And the last thing is, I want to end by saying thank you all again for your ongoing flexibility with this shift. I hope the rest of your distance learning classes go well today. Please continue to update me as much as you are willing. And I will see you all again very soon. So thank you for everything.